BBC Radio Lincolnshire.
4:32 on BBC Radio Lincolnshire. Now, it's almost been a week now since Labour took Lincoln from the Conservatives in the general election. Theresa May has apologised to all the Conservative MPs who lost their seats. So that includes Karl McCartney. The former Conservative MP, Karl McCartney, was the only Conservative MP in Lincolnshire not to get back in. And he's with us in the studio now.
It's funny how some Labour councillors have been tweeting pictures of my posters in skips, etc., isn't it? But they just come across those. They wouldn't have known why they were there, would they? Just
on the expenses point, because you raised that, and I have seen on social media since the general election, you have been replying to a number of people, because social media can be very cruel, can't it? And a number of people have been having a real go at you about your expenses. Your expenses record was made public in different elements of the media just before the election.
Well, no, it's always been public. Let's be honest. Yeah. IPSOS has been around since 2008. Everything is processed and is put out there for the public to look at as they might want to. But if you misrepresent the facts and figures to distort the view, particularly as they did here in Lincoln.
But was it misrepresented, or did people just think they saw the figure and thought, oh, well, you must be up to no good then?
Yeah, I think that's what they automatically assume. And I think that's what the Labour Party and, well, I'm not going to beat around the bush, and the Lincolnite decided they were going to do. And they did it very successfully. You know, they were promoting their information across all strands of social media. And fair play to them, if that's the strategy they want, well, I hope they sleep soundly in their beds at night and can look themselves in the mirror and be happy with what they did, because you know, the facts speak for themselves. It's all there on the IPSOS website. And actually, it's taken us 3 days to collate all the information to find out, you know, where I'm ranked compared to all other MPs. And the fact is, I'm nowhere near the most expensive MP at all. But you wouldn't know that listening to the Labour Party or to the Lincolnite. But the good thing is obviously we now have a Labour Member of Parliament, and I'm sure when it comes down to it, we'll see the Lincolnite obviously examining her expenses and allowances and what she's claimed for or not claimed for in the coming years.
Okay,
I would say though that just let me finish. Let me finish this point because Carl. I'll come back. You can finish the point. Just on the Lincolnite, because you keep mentioning them. Well, I've mentioned them once.
Well, a couple of times. Just a little, because we can't get them on at the moment to come back and defend and put their point of view. I mean, from what I saw, they did put out your expenses. As you say, they're public.
Well, I think they did more than anything. I think any sane, normal person would say they did a pretty good hatchet job. You disagree with that? I don't know. You've read it as much as I have, as have lots of people in Lincoln.
Okay, well, let's not talk about them.
No, let's not. But let's talk about the positive things. When I stood and I was lucky enough to be elected and became the Member of Parliament for Lincoln, honour and a privilege to do the job. But I was very proud of the fact that I didn't have to go into the gutter to do that. I never mentioned MP's expenses or my predecessors and what she had or she hadn't done, because I didn't think I needed to, didn't want to. I don't think it does politicians good at all, actually, to stoop to that level. But unfortunately, that's what some people in the Labour Party here in Lincoln decided that they wanted to do. Well, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. That's a phrase that's used often. There we go.
You sound, and understandable because you've just been kicked out, but you sound incredibly bitter about that. Was it? I mean, I know we're talking about local politics here and what happened in Lincoln, but was it all to do with the national scene? Is that what happened?
Well, that was part of the issue of our campaign. It wasn't as positive as it should be, but certainly I think the Labour campaign here in Lincoln wasn't positive at all. They threw as much mud as they could, whether it was truthful or not, or they gilded the lily, so to speak, but they threw as much mud to see if some could stick. And obviously for some people it worked, because they either didn't vote for me or they voted for the Labour Party. Sad indictment, really, of local politics here in Lincoln, unfortunately.
Everything you do is being watched, and when you left the drill hall, obviously you walked out and walked home, and there was film of that as you were walking off, which you would have seen, and that all gets shared around. It looks very stroppy, doesn't it, when you do that?
Well, it's termed that way by, again, the Lincolnite who did that. But actually, if you don't have to give an interview to the media. You make a decision whether you do or not. I'd not given any interviews that evening at all, and I certainly wasn't going to be goaded into doing whatever the Lincolnite wanted me to do at that point in time. I hadn't even got to speak to any of my supporters or even my family who were there. And why would I want to speak to the Lincolnite first after what they'd done? So, yeah, I know what their game was. And as far as they got the back of my head as I left the drill hall and walked up Free School Lane. Well, that's great, isn't it? Because they didn't get any comment they could play. And they didn't get anything else from me either. So my brothers knew what I was thinking.
A hatchet job by the Lincolnite. Well, Daniel Ionesco is the managing director of the Lincolnite and is with us now. I don't know if you heard. I think you heard a bit more of the interview, and you heard some of what Karl McCartney was saying. What is your reaction to what he's saying?
Good afternoon, William. I find it quite funny to see this sort of statement from our outgoing MP. The accusations that he makes are quite unfounded. We've run one single story, which was a fact file on his voting record and his official expenses from the parliamentary website for expenses. And that was the only story we were able to run about the MP for Lincoln, which was in power for 7 years, after a 7-week election campaign in which she gave no interviews to the mainstream media whatsoever. So that's us, that's yourselves, the paper, and any other stations. No mainstream media interviews. And then we had the Lincoln debate, which we organized together with BBC Radio Lincolnshire. Massively successful event. Over 20,000 people watched that. He declined to take part from the start, citing media bias before even anything was ever published about him during this campaign. So I do refute all the allegations that he's making.
But you did run that article. You say it was a single article, but you did tweet and retweet that article about his expenses and voting record more than once, a number of times, in the days running up to the general election, didn't you?
That is correct. We looked at it as a balancing act to his lack of participation in the campaign or in the debate, and we put that link out with his factual record. So I stress factual record only, expenses and voting record, every time we tweeted about the debate and other candidates in order for everybody to receive equal coverage.
But you know that some people would have, whatever your intention, some people, and I think we mentioned that to him in the discussion we had, some people would have taken that these expenses are wrong and you are have got your nose in the trough. When actually the expenses were very similar to any other MP's expenses, weren't they? It did, to somebody who didn't know, it comes across that you're trying to say, look at this, what the Lincoln MP is doing.
It is correct, because everything is factual. His expenses were factual, and so were his voting record. And the expenses were only part of the fact file which we run on his voting record. So given the fact that everything is factual, and for the parliamentary website for expenses, as well as from the parliamentary website for voting record, I don't see how this can be categorized as a hatchet job, like he puts it.
Did you retweet it more than you would have done because you were annoyed he didn't turn up at the Lincoln debate? I mean, I've seen conversations between you and Karl McCartney before the general election on social media. They're not exactly on friendly terms.
I wouldn't say they're on friendly terms. That's mainly because since the general election in 2015, I've been through constant attacks on Twitter from Karl, unjustified, may I add. But we are a serious publication, and we don't hold this type of grudges. But as I said in the previous intervention, we tweeted and posted on social media a link to the article with the former MP's expenses and voting record every time we posted it about the debate and all the other candidates that we've had in the joint program we held together. So from our point of view, that was a balancing act in order to make sure that all the candidates get equal exposure, whether they want to speak to media or not.
You also put out, which you're perfectly entitled to do, because you have that flexibility, you also put out promoted tweets advertising Karen Lee for Labour in between all these expenses tweets and voting record tweets, didn't you?
I would strongly talk against that. We have posted our promoted tweet a paid campaign from the Labour Party on the day of the election, on which we haven't posted about any other candidates whatsoever or any other election material.
So on the day of the election, you promoted Karen Lee for Labour?
We haven't endorsed Karen Lee for Labour. We carried a paid promotion from Karen Lee, the Labour candidate.
Which is the same, I suppose, as seeing newspapers. I think the Lincolnshire Echo ran
Which is the same as a newspaper carrying a wraparound from the Conservative Party, yes.
OK. So you're surprised at what Karl McCartney's been saying this afternoon, are you?
Very surprised, very surprised. He had multiple opportunities and ample opportunities to speak, not only to us, but with any other media in the county, which he declined, and he didn't take part in any conversations ahead of the general election.
OK, thank you very much. Thanks for talking to us. Daniel Ionescu is the Managing Director of the Lincolnite. Just coming back on some of those things that the former MP for Lincoln, Karl McCartney, had to say about the Lincolnite earlier this afternoon. You can go back, you can listen to the full interview if you wish.
Should Theresa May resign?